thank you all for showing up here. I'm Jack Leeser here with my wife, Sarah. She's going to be off, and she'll be reading the questions and stuff. And I thank you for joining us for another Jack's Learning Circle interview. Each month I interview a different expert in the horse world, and this month we have Peggy Cummings, the founder of Connected Riding. And before we get started, I just want to let you know how this is going to work. I have some questions that I'll be asking Peggy, and then we'll go to your questions. And if you leave your questions in the chat area, then we'll get to those as we go through here. We'll start off with my questions, and then we'll get to them as we go along. We're going to keep this around an hour long so we don't get too long, but then we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. All right. So, Peggy, thank you for joining us here and having you on for this. I really feel an honor to have you here. It's been a long time. I first met you back in 2003, I think it was, and the things that you taught there that I learned at your clinic there, I still use today with that, and some of the posture things and getting people to loosen their back up and sitting in the saddle. So it's an honor to have you here to be able to go over some things. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started with horses and how you came up with Connected Riding?
Well, I've been teaching since I was 16, and I ran a school with 14 horses for 18 years when I lived in the Northeast, and my passion has been getting horses and people to be better partners. And I was an avid rider, trainer, and learner, and my body started bothering me. And when I was in my early 30s, I had a lot of back problems. And I organized clinics since I had a growing family of 6 children. I organized a lot of clinics, brought clinicians to me so that I didn't have to travel. And I was passionate about learning more about dressage. And I've ridden Western. I started riding Western. I was born in Central America, then rode hunt seat, then was introduced to saddle seat, and then I went into eventing and then dressage. And what is really my passion is how to get any horse to have a leg at each corner, and that means an independent leg at each corner, and a spine that is free. And through my own discomfort in my own body, it brought me paying attention, because I had to change a lot of things in me, because in the clinics that I was learning, I was getting progressively stiff, and that doesn't work. You know, my horses started telling me that something wasn't going well. But I really noticed in my school horses that if I had a tense rider, even a 60-pound child on a certain horse, that horse wouldn't want to work the rest of the day sometimes. You know, certain body types got along with certain horses, and other body types didn't. You know, and so I really wanted to learn more about that. And in the 80s, I met Sally Swift, and the whole, from 81 to 90, I dedicated all my time to really learning from her, because she was the first person that had pointed that the human body really needed more attention than was being paid attention to. And
kind of the forerunner to all of this, not?
Yeah, and I was teaching I taught about 100 children a week, and you get to see a lot of different types, and I knew my horses really well. And I also taught adults. And I was very focused before I'd even met Sally on how people sat, what they did with their bodies, and I used a lot of visualization. So when I met Sally, I thought, wow, I'm hearing something that resonates with me. And then 3 or 4 years later, I met Linda Tellington Jones, and the critical thing that I got from her was taking another look at horses on the ground and what their behavior was telling you. And horses came to my barn because people couldn't deal with them. I was dealing with behavior issues, and what I found was that it was lack of understanding issues. That behavior in horses happens because the horse is out of balance or uncomfortable, or he can't move freely, or he got hurt, and in rehabbing, something doesn't quite work, just like when people get a cast off and they can't, let's say they had a broken leg and they can't learn to walk just like they used to inside of a week. And we sometimes expect our horses to go back into work as if nothing had happened. So those, I have countless clinicians and wonderful people that I've worked with over the years, but I really started looking at the horse's body and what that horse needed to be comfortable in its work, and what the rider needed to be free in their body, but also for what the rider needed to learn of what they were doing or not doing that was affecting the horse in either a positive or not way. So that's what I've been doing, and I'm passionate about it. I just love it. I really want to work with more teachers to help them to add to the repertoire that they are already doing and helping riders and horses. But some of the, let's say, they're not shortcuts, but things that I have learned that make such a huge difference in such a short time, that is what I want to share.
Just taking your years of knowledge and being able to pass that along to somebody else so they don't have to spend that time doing that.
Right. There's a lot of the training issues can be lessened by many ways of not only paying attention to the rider's body, but also what the horse is doing and the way they're moving or not moving.
And so that's kind of how you came up with connected riding, is you saw these people and these children, the way that they were on their horse, the way their posture was, how that was affecting the horse, whether it was good or bad.
Right. A 60-pound child can make a 1,000-pound horse bracy and crooked.
That's amazing.
And
I've seen that too. But
it is pretty amazing. And the thing is that it could take, let's say, a weekend of hard riding to really instill a real bracing pattern in a horse, and it'll take you 6 to 9 months or longer to undo it. So what do you to pay attention to getting the two sides of the body to work more evenly, rather than one side take over and spend the rest of the riding time focusing on the bad side.
Did you see that children tended to have a certain issue, and then adults having other issues, or is it kind of the same general issues across the board?
Well, a lot of it is same general issues across the board. When you have a natural rider in a child, what starts getting in the way is some of the way they're being taught, some of the words that are being said, like sit up, get your shoulders back, put your heels down, keep your legs still, or squeeze with your knees, or things that compress the rider in motion, because basically we should be movable in motion so that we can be with the motion, not against the motion. You know.
Yeah. So what do you feel like are some of the things, main issues that come up that cause that brace or cause that stiffness? What are we doing as riders to cause that?
One is the language that is being used, and certain things that it needs to be taught as a rebalancing cycle, is that you have to do something to stay in motion with the horse. You have to let go of tension and motion, and that is a learned thing. Very few natural riders on the big scale. You know, there's many riders that know how to do that, but many don't. And when there's fear involved, it disappears. And the other thing is that all horses that are ridden need to be taught a weight-bearing posture. That's a taught thing. The horse loses his own sense of rebalancing once a halter and a girth go around them. You know, they have to learn how to rebalance themselves with weight on their back. And you know, you've started many horses. You get on some and they know how to walk and they seem to go easily. Others act like they don't even know how to walk.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah,
you know, people are the same way.
Which way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and what started me, oftentimes if I had a horse that wouldn't go, I'd get off and I'd move them on the ground and I'd touch them and I'd rub them to see if I could figure out or loosen them in a way, and then I'd get back on and see how they were going. So that's what, not only was I paying attention to the way the rider was being, but I really started noticing how the horse carried himself. I became really interested in the balance of feet, the teeth, saddles, you know.
Kind of a holistic approach, but then
yeah, the whole thing, because you know, when you're working a horse 5 to 6 hours a day, for instance, in a children's camp situation, you can't afford 1 or 2 horses not wanting to work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or what makes the horses start going sour? I really got interested in that. Or when you're teaching adults, you can't afford a horse that spooks all the time. Why is the horse spooking? Because he's spooking? No, there's something going on. Find out, you know.
Yeah. Did you find a correlation to the way people were riding was causing the spooking?
That and tension. Tension and discomfort.
Which goes back to the riders, you know, banging on their back or stiff or tight.
Right, exactly. And when we had beginner riders, and many years ago, I worked in a school of equitation. My riding master was an ex-cavalryman, and we ran beside all the beginners. We didn't allow them to. They held the reins, but they had no influence on the horse. We did the influencing on the ground. And when I started my school, I did the same thing. And I had, Sally Swift used to comment, she said, "You've got the best school horses I've ever seen because they are responsive." You know, because we paid attention to those things. And when I went and taught in colleges with the horses in the school systems, they were shut down. They weren't interested. They were just like robots. And that doesn't have to be. I had one student come to me in a clinic. She rode with me 2 clinics, and she taught at one of the major schools on the East Coast. And she went back and taught those kids to do some simple exercises on the ground before getting on, and she changed the way they were sitting in the saddles. And 3/4 of the term through, they were the only group of horses that didn't have sore backs and weren't sour out of the whole school.
Yeah. You know, it reminds me of one of my mentors, Thomas Ritter, and he talks about, you know, stepping in the stirrup stepping is what he calls it, and using that in a way to help your horse. So you might just put an ounce or two of pressure in the stirrup or in your knee or in your seat to slow the foot down or to hold the foot in the ground a little bit longer. But it's, you know, it's a conscious thing. And over the years, I've been trying to teach that to other people. And it always amazes me when people just start getting in time with the foot. They're just trying to feel where the feet are and what the feet are doing. That when they just think about one foot and trying to feel it when it hits the ground, and just them thinking that, how the horse goes, "Oh, I feel that," and starts slowing down. They're really not doing anything that you can see. They probably are. But it always amazes me how little the person's doing, but how much it affects the horse. And so it sounds like what you're saying is inadvertently people are doing that through the stiffnesses. Because if you keep doing it for a long period of time, it causes damage.
Right. It does. It does. And then when people get frustrated, they work harder rather than, you know, the other thing is observing how the horse learns. If you give them some information and then let them absorb it and then try it again rather than drilling the information in. You know, there are many, many disciplines. You see people drilling, and the horses just glaze over. Either that or rebel.
Yeah, exactly. So everybody out there, if you have any questions, go into the questions area there and leave some questions. We'd love to hear from you. I know we've got a few in there, and we'll get to those in a little bit. But great information, Peggy. So is there a difference? You know, I'm pretty tall, so my body type to, let's say, somebody who's shorter or a shorter torso, what are the differences with, you know, the different shapes of people, you know, the taller and shorter? How does that affect the horse?
Well, you know, many people ride horses that don't fit. I certainly was in that category for many years, having been brought up in Central America, and I started being pretty long-legged, riding smaller horses. You have to learn where you are in space, and the critical thing is to that your legs have to surround the horse, and your seat bones have to be placed in the place where your thighs move with ease, and it's an invisible movement, but that thigh movement that affects the movement of the head of the femur, and then of the lower leg and the ankle and the foot is critical. That's the prime mover. And if the seat bones aren't placed right, if the thigh cannot move, the upper body gets pushed back more by the force of motion, and it resists the forward motion of the horse more, if that makes any sense.
I think so. So you're kind of saying the seat has to be balanced, and then with a balanced seat, that allows movement in the thighs. Is that what I'm hearing?
Right. And the thighs, it's not visible, but the thigh bone has to have movement.
Okay. Is that kind of the movement of the horse's back as it's rising and falling?
Exactly. And it has to be able to, in order to influence it, it has to be able to receive it, and the person not sitting right. So let's say a short person that doesn't receive that, if, it just all depends on how they receive. It doesn't matter if they're short or tall or certain body types, like if they're long on a short horse, they have to pay attention. The stirrups have to be shorter. I remember Lendon Gray, when she rode Seldom Seen, that was a 14-2 pony. She took him to the Grand Prix level, and she shortened her stirrups a couple holes of any other horses that she rode, because she was taller. And a very long body, long upper body, has to be aware of where they are in space. Otherwise, they get really left behind the motion. The more critical things are if it's a body that undulates in motion, that is more willowy in their motion. If you were walking up a mountain carrying some child piggyback and all they did was wiggle, what kind of fun would you have walking up that hill?
Yeah, interesting.
Or if you had somebody that's slumping on your back, how much of a drag would you feel? Or if you had somebody really arched, that's another kind of drag. But it's more concussive. It's much harder to carry weight. It's not the body type so much, but what is that body doing? What posture is that body doing? That's the key thing. People say, well, I'm too short, well, I'm too fat, well, I'm this, well, I'm that. I don't look at that so carefully as I do as I look at, is this person lifting their sternum and hollowing their back, or dropping their sternum and rounding their back, or being a willow on top of the horse, because that prevents the seat bones from staying in that neutral place, and it prevents the thigh bones from moving independently. Just having freedom of movement. So that makes the legs and hips and lower back grab, and it makes the upper body get pushed more by the force of motion.
So how does one know if you're doing this?
Well,
how can we leave the people here who are watching today, give them some information so they can go back, to their horse and go, hey, I'm actually doing this, or no, I'm doing pretty good with this. How can we tell?
Well, one of the things is that I have a system of checks that I have people do. In the latest book that I've published, which is Connect with Your Horse from the Saddle. One of a simple check is if you're sitting in a chair, on the edge of a chair, and you feel that you're just sitting there with your back soft and you're not doing anything to be upright. And if you run your hand on your back, it feels pretty flat. So if you lift the leg up and down, it should be pretty simple. You don't have to use any muscles in your upper body to just lift that leg up and down, as if you were marching that leg and lifting it 3 inches off the ground and then putting it down. And people can try that as I talk about it.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be a big deal. Sometimes people say, well, one leg's easier than the other. That's a common thing that happens sometimes because we're not the same left to right, but nor are horses. But the primary thing is, can you lift that leg up and down easily and that leg doesn't weigh a ton? Usually people say, yeah, simple. Then if you arch your back and lift the leg, back up one, then back to the first way that you did it. Press on the leg. You still have a soft back. The back feels flat. You're not doing anything with your upper body. You press on that leg as if you want to slow down the movement. And then you lift it up and down. And you notice that you still have strength in that leg and you can lift it.
Yeah, it's pretty easy.
It's really easy. And it feels like your leg got stronger in a way.
Yeah.
Then if you arch, slump, or do a wiggly motion with your upper body, you'll notice that the leg is harder to lift.
Yeah.
And that it takes more force, more effort, and it starts making your upper body tight.
Yeah, because as soon as you start lifting your leg, then the back clenches.
Right. Right. And so the first way, I call that finding connection, because what you're doing, you're pressing on your thigh, it's automatically engaging your core muscles, and it's not an effort to keep that motion going. And then when you do it in any of the other 3 ways, it disconnects your upper body from your lower body. It creates compression in your back. And not only that, but if you're doing this on a horse, you're putting that horse on the forehand. That's just a physical truth. It's not something I've invented. That horse has no way of lifting its back efficiently if your torso has any kind of tension in it.
So can you explain a little bit what's going on, why that is? Is it because your seat's pressing on their back and not allowing the back to come up?
There's a law of equal and opposing forces. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. If I put my hand on your shoulder and I'm standing in neutral, you will say to me, or I'll say, am I bothering you? And you say no, because my hand's just on your shoulder. But if I stiffen my back, you'll say, now you're pushing on me. Well, I'm not pushing on you. You feel my dead weight. I didn't push. I got my upper body compressed, my back compressed, and it made my weight heavy. So what the horse does is he's on the forehand anyway to begin with, especially if we don't prepare the horse's back before we get on. And then you get on them and you expect them to be light and ready to roll. And the ones that are more active sometimes get too active, or the horses that get more hyper get hyper, and the horses that get duller get duller. And the first gate that we take away freedom from is the walk.
Is that why it's always hard to get a quality walk going?
Exactly. And how many disciplines lack a quality walk?
Just about everyone.
Mm-hmm. And because people, the riders, do not know what they're doing that is lessening the quality of that walk.
And so what you're saying, that posture, whether you're arched too much or too, up, which is really clinching your back, or if you're slumped, either one of those is going to have that effect of causing your horse not to lift and to want to slow down.
Exactly. Or speed up. Or be hypermobile. If you get a hypermobile person on a horse that rubbernecks, that is not a good combination.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's just interesting how, as you're talking, because that was one of the things I remember from what you showed us years ago is just that ability to even just stand, but stand kind of relaxed and with your knees a little soft, and how much stronger and how much more into the ground you were, and then taking that posture up onto the horse and sitting on the horse kind of in that same way, how just sitting there when you're in that relaxed posture, it's so much easier to stay upright than if you get arched or if you get hollow and you push on their back, how easy it is to topple.
Right, and Jack, if every riding teacher knew some of these principles, how much easier would it be for people to learn and horses to enjoy their job?
Yeah, it would be huge. So let me see here. Got a question.
Get stability while also having fluidity.
Okay, here's a good question. How do you get stability and still have fluidity? I think that was the, yeah.
They go hand in hand. It absolutely goes hand in hand. First of all, how to learn this is to really feel the contrast for the person themselves, for the rider themselves, to have the contrast of what they do in a familiar way. What is their current way of being? And then to make the change. What tiny little change, and sometimes these changes are so minute, but how to make the change that gets them into sync with that horse's motion, and feel when they get out of sync and then how to get back in sync. And when they're in sync with that horse's motion, there's fluidity. There's no question about it. You don't have to work on getting fluidity. You are fluid.
And do you find that that's the balance between having enough rigidity in your body to be movable, but not too stiff to where you're not movable?
It's tension. It's a tension with integrity that you need. And the horse also needs that tensegrity, basically. Do you know, if you're in a pool of water and the water is up to your shoulders, if you walk across the short side of that pool, you don't get stiff in walking. Why do they send people that have body problems to do water aerobics? Because people move through the water, but they don't get tight doing it. And the force of the water causes them to work the muscles. There's a tension. The water is creating tension on their body that makes their muscles work more, and therefore they're strengthening things without the not good tension, which is compression.
You know, I like to use the example of a good handshake. You have some people, you shake their hand and they just about pick you up off the ground.
Right.
You know, you feel like a jackhammer. And
Right.
then you have somebody who's like a wet noodle. There's nothing there, and you don't really even want to hold it.
Exactly.
A good give and take, so there's tone there, but there's still fluidity going back and forth.
Exactly. Because motion has to go through in order for it to build a reciprocity between two beings, and a reciprocity and a connection between two beings, and that is elegant and fluid.
Yeah, and it's awesome when you get that with your horse. I mean,
and my deal, absolutely, and my deal in teaching this is that you can get it at any age, with any body type, with any discipline, with any horse, if you just start paying attention to how learning some basic things that get you aware of your own posture and how to help your horse have a better weight-bearing posture. It's just really cool. It really makes a difference.
Well, cool. So here's another question from Sarah Jackson. Is there a best way to hold the reins to communicate and to connect with the horse, or would that depend on the horse and the rider?
Well, for one thing, the weight of reins, all kinds of different reins, it's an individual thing. You know, if you have a skinny spoon in your hand, you hold it, you have a certain feel. If you have a fat spoon in your hand, you have a different feel. So you can kind of identify with that. But the big thing in holding reins, if they're heavy reins, the horse can feel, he can feel that, but what they're really feeling is what motion is coming through from your upper body and your arms. And the rhythm that comes through from your elbows has to go through. The horse's head has a rhythm. How his head is being held when you ride him. The bit has an oscillating rhythm in the mouth, or if he's not being ridden in a bit, there's still an oscillating rhythm that comes out of the two sides of that horse's head. And that rhythm has to go through to your arms, and it has to be received to your arms in a soft, receptive way. And if you're not sitting in neutral, that rhythm doesn't come through like that. So it doesn't matter how you hold the reins. If you're not in neutral, that horse is feeling a drag or a pull from your hands. But if you're sitting in neutral, he feels an oscillating rhythm. So does that answer the question? It's not how, you know, if you squeeze your hand on the reins, that stops the flow going through from that horse's mouth to the rider's elbow.
No, I think that's very well. So it really goes right back to that posture, and are you in that good place in your inner core?
Exactly. Right. It's out of your external muscles into your internal muscles. You want to turn your internal muscles on, or have them turn on when needed, your stabilizing muscles have to be working in an elastic way. And the same thing with the horse. What do you want the horse to do? Stretch his spine. What does he have to do? Turn off the top line muscles and turn on the bottom line muscles, right?
Yeah. So it's really, you're asking a horse to do the same thing we need to be doing.
Exactly. You have to carry yourself, and the horse has to carry himself in order for the motion to go through from one being through to the other, and then they go together in motion. Just like skipping rope, the rope's not going to wait for you to get your act together. You have to be one split second in front of that rope to be in sync. And if that rope rhythm changes, you have to change with it.
Yeah, cool. Great. So Bonnie's got a question here. I do dressage with my Percheron cross and also drive him. From what you said about weight on their back, it would make sense that he needs to find a different balance going from one to the other. Have you worked with many driving horses? Is he less steady in the bridle when driven? He is less steady in the bridle when he is ridden.
It all goes again back to posture. I helped a woman with her 11, she started as an 11-year-old Morgan broodmare that had quite a belly on her. And I think it was 3 years, she became Northwest driving champion at the intermediate level, combined driving champion. How did we do that? With all these postural things. And if she sat in the carriage in a brace, the horse equally braced and would come across a diagonal and break into a canter, which was a no-no. But if she kept her back soft in the carriage and she used her elbows in an elastic motion, the horse did beautifully. So it's all about rhythm and how you use your body and what is the posture. I can tell in pictures. I have my students look at magazines and find pictures of horses in good posture, because whatever's going on in the carriage is going to be going on if you do work on the ground or if you do work under saddle. And if the rider's posture is not in neutral, it's going to affect when they're riding. Now, I'm kind of going back to the same thing, but can you see that I'm going to go back to the same thing because that is the root of the issues.
Yeah. Well, and I have to validate that, just even in me working with horses and my students, just lunging, oftentimes I'll tell the students is to lunge like you're sitting on a horse, like you're riding. So being in the same posture as you would be sitting up in the horse. And if you're too relaxed, the connection doesn't go through. Mm-hmm. So it's really, you're saying the same thing there.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Great. So Sarah what might be the best way to teach one's horse how to turn to the left or to the right to not causing bracing or resistance?
Well, usually horses fall in on one shoulder. And riders have a certain way that they can rotate or turn their upper body more with ease. I call the turning of the upper body, the trunk, I call it rotation. And that means that as the upper body starts to move, and turning to one side, the back doesn't get tight and one shoulder doesn't drop and one hip doesn't drop. You know, so the hips and the shoulders are parallel to the ground. And it also moves the legs, and the seat bones shift a little bit, but you are not shifting weight. The action does the shifting.
So the rotation of the shoulders does the shifting, not you shifting.
Right. And it's not just the shoulders, it's the whole trunk. It feels like your ribs, that your ribs are just swiveling a little bit, like you swivel on an office chair. You know, usually if people have a swivel stool, they can swivel that pretty easy without getting super tight in the doing. But for some reason, when people hold reins and they have to turn, they start tightening their back to turn their shoulders. And that will, first of all, you have to know, you, the rider, have to know which side does the horse lean on. You know, which side does he fall in on? And which is your side of ease to rotate to? And then there are ways that you can check yourself. Like in the saddle, I have people press on their thighs or press on the front of the saddle because there's a way to check whether you are tightening someplace or not. And the more that you get in tune with those things, and there's a rotation check. It's also in my new book. Because if you can check yourself as you're moving along with the horse, and then you identify that with the sensation in your body at the moment, it makes it easier for you to learn. In other words, what I love to teach riders is to be self-aware and self-monitoring, because we don't always have an instructor with us. So you have to know what to do with your own body and how to help your horse when you're out in the middle of nowhere.
Well, it sounds like, too, what you're talking about is you could be doing in front of your computer. As you're just sitting there, are you in that same good posture?
Exactly. Or
so
standing by the sink or whatever else you do, shoveling manure, pushing a wheelbarrow. How do you do that?
Cool. Well, great. So Belinda's got a question here. Can the wrong saddle make getting the seat bones in the proper position impossible to achieve? I feel most of the sink with the horse riding bareback. Thank you and love this.
Yeah, saddles are an issue. Saddles are a real issue because many saddles do not support a female pelvis in the way that it should. And you know, it's just like trying on different gloves. Some feel good and some don't, you know, and it's not often the saddle company that will teach you what to look for in a saddle that fits, and not every saddle company is going to have a saddle that will fit every single horse. So it's a rider education and a rider beware thing. You have to be able to move those thighs minutely with ease where you sit, and it's really important for a female pelvis that there's no feeling of bumping your crotch while you're riding, or a feeling that they're going to arch to protect themselves. Equally, a male has to feel comfortable in the saddle, and most females always have to readjust their seat bones forward about a 1/16 of an inch, and most males have to readjust their seat bones back a 1/16 of an inch. But the key thing is that thigh has to have movement, and many of the saddles don't have enough support, even for guys way up in the groin and in that pelvic bowl area.
Great. This kind of goes with the next question. Raylene asked, is it easier to connect with the horse riding back?
Is it easier to connect
with the horse riding bareback?
Not necessarily, because, well, number one, it depends on the horse's back. People feel the movement, but that doesn't mean you're connecting with him in motion. What I mean is, going back to skipping a rope, the only way to skip a rope is to be in sync with that rope. Otherwise, you can't skip, right?
Yeah.
So, a lot of people that ride bareback have no contact with the lower leg, which makes the upper body have to deal with more of the force of motion. And many, many people tend to sit bareback, and they can stay with the motion. I mean, I watch these bareback riders a lot, and they're slightly sitting on their pockets and skimming the motion. But they can stick with the horse. It's a learned skill, but that doesn't mean that they're in sync. But obviously you can feel the horse moving underneath you more, so people think, oh, I'm moving with the horse. No, you're not. Not necessarily, anyway.
Yeah, and I would have to agree with that. Years ago I used to ride a lot of bareback in the bareback pad, and I had a big old warm blood, and it really, I have to attribute it helped me learn how to really ride the motion, but it didn't really put me in the best posture. And it wasn't until I started learning more about the posture, and some of your work helped me with that, is how, bareback puts your feet way up and puts your seat right into their back, so you're pressing more on their back, causing the horse to kind of hollow out. And that's what I found with my horse. And so, really, really what you're talking about there applies. So, cool. So, Sarah here also has, what are your views on riding long and low as opposed to a tight frame? How do you encourage this in a horse that tends to go on the forehead? Thanks again for doing this webinar. Very informative.
So, every horse has to start out by learning to lengthen their neck and telescope it. And many people don't even know what telescoping is. When the horse is using his neck in a good way, and when he's actually lifting his back, or using a horse, thinking of how to say this, a horse on the forehand is like a front wheel drive. A horse, in order to start bearing weight effectively, has to be using all four legs. So that means like an all-wheel drive. And so when that horse learns to release its neck, and it can arc its body in either direction, and there again, it doesn't matter the discipline. When the horse learns to arc, then it starts also learning more how to shift its weight in motion, and can shift the weight back. So as the horse arcs in a direction, the hind leg steps under, and it can push and lift the thoracic sling and get a release of that spine. And that is the beginning that all horses should experience in training. Then, after you get that accordion working long, and it doesn't mean putting their nose on the ground and always having it on the ground, but it means having a stretched posture. There's a great picture of a gray horse in my book with that. It was a Spanish stallion that finally stretched his spine. And they need to be able to do that before they go into, what was she called it, the other posture?
Into a tight frame.
Yeah. You say the word again of the frame?
You use tight frame.
Yeah. It has to learn to go long before it can shorten. It's like an accordion has to open in order to close. And the posture that a horse can put himself because of using his spine correctly is not a held frame. And once it learns to lengthen, it can learn to shorten it. And from the shortening, it can learn to shift more weight back, and that's where collection can begin to come. And that frame, so to speak, or posture, becomes a more elevated and gathered posture, but it's not a held frame.
So in the lengthening process, though, and I think this is a little bit of what her question was too, is how do you get the lengthening without them just dumping on the forehand?
Because they have to learn how to their neck correctly, they have to bend correctly, and they have to be pushing from the hind legs. And when the horse starts pushing from the hind legs, he'll put himself in that, he'll do it on his own. That's the deal. The horse does it. We have to allow it. We have to do the steps so that the horse can do it.
And so it sounds like lots of bending exercises to help with that.
Right, and using your body, not riding from your hands, and yeah, you've got to strengthen. I call it teaching a horse to draw his own bow. You know, when you draw a bow, there has to be a certain tension. We were talking about that tension earlier, that engagement of those inner core muscles.
So you've talked about the weight-bearing posture. Let's talk a little bit about that here, and then we'll kind of wrap this up. We're kind of getting a little past an hour here, but I just want to hear, because you're talking about that weight-bearing posture, and before we were on, we were kind of talking about how in the world of horsemanship, doesn't matter what discipline it is, we're seeing horses that aren't in this posture. So really, what is it, and what are some things people can do to achieve that?
Well, one of the things that I developed all the groundwork exercises I do, because it teaches average riders, how to educate the horse's walk and how to develop the horse's walk into a trot transition that maintains oscillation and movement through the horse's body. And that is an absolute key. And this is one of the reasons that we started And I've been actually teaching, as if I'm a school for many years, and thinking about starting our school, because this education needs to be put out there. How can you develop that weight-bearing posture? It has to start with a neutral posture in the horse and all four legs weight-bearing, and then as the horse goes into an arc, to come out of the arc with a push. And people can feel it. Novice people are learning how to do this. And in order for the horse to do it, any bracing pattern that is majorly taking over their body has to be released in order for the horse to start loosening and carrying itself. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah. It's about getting the brace out. I assume this is what you're saying, is you want to get
the brace
out of all the transition, and through that you're getting the equal weight on the horse's legs. You're starting to get them balanced. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so many people don't know that their horse is on a forehand. They think that because he's in a frame, he's coming through. He's not.
Yeah, yeah. And then, again, we see that a lot, and in pretty much every discipline, about how the horse, you see so many horses just overbent, overflexed, and they think, well, the horse is collected. And it's like, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. No. So collection doesn't mean the horse dropping his head and pulling his nose in. Collection is a gathering of the accordion, and the accordion has to be free to open and close and bend in one direction and the other fairly equally. And this is possible. It absolutely is possible. If anyone would know how to play an accordion, they know that if you squish it hard or aren't fluid, the music doesn't come out. But if you kind of get it going fluidly in and out, there's a lot of sound that comes out.
Yeah. So what are one or two or three character traits that you see a horse person needs to have to really be effective with a horse?
Well, the first thing is patience and awareness of their body and an openness for a change and learning. Openness to change and learning. It's just, these things are absolutely critical in my mind.
Awesome. So tell us about your school. What exciting things are you doing here coming up? You've been talking about your school here, and before we got on, you were talking a bit about that. So let everybody know about what you got coming up, what you're doing.
Well, what we've finally accomplished is to create a nonprofit, because we've had so many people say, how can we help? And what we want to be freer to do, or more able to do, is we've got some wonderful instructors, and we want to be able to educate them, continue the education and get together so that we can write more curriculum and do more presentations. It's not a school. The school doesn't have a building or an arena. It's a virtual school which we can take on the road and give courses through the school, the body of the School of Connected Riding. And we've already had great response to our beginning this. And we just need help getting the word out and getting people. We're doing an expo in September here in Oregon, and there's so many different types of things that we can take to communities as a school to help educate, bring awareness. And the biggest thing I'd like to do is have more of an inroad with instructors that are reaching so many people, so that we, Connected Riding, can augment their education and create more ease in the dedicated job that they have chosen to do.
Yeah, I agree. That sounds like an awesome thing. So how can somebody get a hold of you if they want to come to your show? I guess it's not a show, but your presentation here this September, or if they want to learn more about the school, or even your books and stuff? Where can they go to find out more of that?
Well, Connected Riding has a website. The school has a website. And even if people just purchase a ticket to come and they don't come, it's helping us.
Awesome. So they can purchase that ticket at Connected Riding?
At the School of Connected Riding.
School of Connected Riding. Awesome. Well, we'll send out a link to everybody here tomorrow on the links. You've got several books out there. What are some of your books, and where would they go to find your books?
All the books are on the website, on the Connected Riding website. We have a Connected Riding store, and we welcome people to browse and also to leave comments, or if anyone has testimonials, there's a place there to write, because we get wonderful feedback from people. Sometimes it comes years after it's happened, but it's really nice to know, what the effects are of them learning a few things from this body of work, which in my mind, it's amazed me how it has become such a gift to the horse world. So I hope to continue doing this for many, many years.
Well, we thank you for it, and I thank you too for things you taught me years and years ago, and it's helped me so much, and I've passed it on to my students. So I really appreciate you for that. I appreciate everybody's time, all of you who've come and spent an hour with us. I know everybody's time is valuable, and we thank you for taking that time with us here this evening. And Peggy, thank you so much for being able to do this. I really enjoyed it. Lots of great information. So,
and thank you, Jack, for doing this, because this really provides a very needed service. So thank you.
Well, you're so welcome. And this is something that we're wanting to do through the My Learning Circle. It's an online membership that we have, and with the membership, I send out a video every week, a new video, and part of that is going to be these interviews with people like you. So we're really excited about that. So again, I just thank you all for showing up and participating, and we'll see you around. Thanks. Thanks,
Bye.
Peggy.
Bye-bye.